Welcome back to One More Thing. Today, we're diving into the rich, layered gotchas from seasons 1 and 2. The ones that deserve a second look because they reveal the way the show actually works. Long story short, I'm looking at the ones where I have a lot to say. If you're here for subtlety, character psychology, and breakdowns you probably haven't heard before, then you're in the right place. I'll be deep diving into 5 episodes, and then I'll do a quick fire mention of all of the other episodes in the seasons. Sound good? Let's begin. So I'll give a quick explanation of the gotcha for those who haven't seen Columbo before. But for a more in-depth video on the structure of Columbo, head to my video about why we see the killer first. So, the opening of Columbo almost always shows the killer committing the murder. Columbo's spidey senses tell him who the killer is within the first 5 minutes of meeting them. So the problem is never really identification, it's finding hard evidence that ties the murder to the killer that will actually hold up in court. Columbo is working with inconsistencies, intuition, and behavioural tells long before he has any concrete proof. And then comes the pop.
That's the big clue that allows Columbo to catch the murderer. That's Peter's phrase.
So the moment where Columbo realises how they did it or how he can catch them.
Yeah, that's what they're saying, and that'll be 15 yards for tripping. And that's a real break.
Sometimes we see this moment of realisation on screen, and sometimes we don't. But either way, once it's happened, everything that follows is deliberate. His techniques to incriminate the killer vary. If they've been cautious, then he probably will nudge them into action. If he needs them to slip up, he creates a situation where the only way out is to do something new, whether that's move an object, explain a detail, or correct him, or unknowingly plant fresh evidence. So that's the gotcha. It's not just the reveal, it's the moment the killer realises the story that they've been telling can no longer survive.
Done a very nice job.
With that in mind, how do we really evaluate these moments? I've boiled it down to a few key factors I use when diving into these gotcha scenes. Columbo veterans, comment your criteria too. What makes an interesting gotcha? Okay, let's begin. Starting with a fan favourite, we have Murder by the Book. Arrogant author Ken Franklin has killed his writing buddy for wanting to go separate ways. Columbo has spent all episode trying to nail him, but as per usual, he lacks hard evidence. Cut to the final scene and the lieutenant shows up at Jim's old office just before the moving crew start their job. Ken thinks he's about to have a field day in proving Columbo's theories wrong.
Attorney, because I promise you I'm going to sue you and your department for false arrest and defamation of character.
He's sitting in that chair and literally all he needs is an evil bunny and the costume is complete. Then Columbo reveals that the first murder was so good that it must have only come from a great mystery writer like Jim Ferris. Turns out Columbo and his team searched the office looking for a piece of paper where Jim would have written the plot down, and it seems they found it. How Franklin will explain to a jury how the murder was identical to the one written down, not too sure. Some people think that this is a small and insignificant piece of evidence, but we forget that it's all of the pieces added together that will get him convicted. Columbo asks Ken, "Do you want me to continue?" To which he says no, meaning Columbo probably has more evidence. For example, the lab report would have found no evidence of gunpowder, blood, or cartridges at the supposed scene of the crime. Also, the holes in Ken's theory, like if a hitman really did kill Jim, how did they get the body out of the office in the short time between the wife calling the police and them arriving at the scene of the crime? So there is a lot for Columbo to continue with. So I think the greatness of the setup comes from the amount of evidence Columbo had, rather than the showdown at the office. But what I really do like is the positioning. So when Ken walks in, Columbo is sitting in this fancy chair. And then Ken sits in that same chair while Columbo reads off his fate. It's like initially Columbo is already occupying Ken's imagined position of control. And then when Ken sits in the chair, he gets the symbol of authority, but none of the actual authority itself. And that's when the chair becomes rather ironic rather than empowering. Some great directing from Spielberg there. Part of what makes this gotcha interesting is explaining why Ken confessed so quickly. I think a major part of it comes from the element of surprise. If Ken had more time, I reckon he would have come up with something a bit more semi-plausible. I think it's a little bit out of character for him to confess so quickly, especially with all of that big talk beforehand. For someone who spends the entire episode posturing and performing in confidence, that moment exposes how poorly he actually handles pressure. So maybe the confession is actually completely in character. Ken talks big, but when he's cornered unexpectedly, he folds. You guys can let me know what you think in the comments. At the same time, this gotcha annoys me just a little bit because I think Ken could have gotten away with it. I'm not a lawyer, but is there really anything about the paper that points directly to Ken? I'm not sure if Columbo is able to link any physical, hard evidence to Ken, like a murder weapon or anything of that sort. Nor is Columbo even able to say where the murder happened. However, when I think about it, Columbo will probably tell some police guys to go over to Ken's cabin, search it, and then they'll find some blood splatters or something over there. But yeah, I just wonder if there's any room here for reasonable doubt. And I think a part of the reason we accept it so easily is because we saw the murder at the start of the episode. Like Columbo, we already know that Ken is guilty. So when he confesses, it feels right. But imagine we hadn't seen the crime. A story idea written on a random piece of paper by another man, discovered at a convenient moment, suddenly causing Ken to buckle just after threatening Columbo for a defamation suit. I don't know, that feels vague at best. Despite all of that, I still enjoy this gotcha immensely. Columbo's casual line, "I'm here to arrest you for murder," delivered with zero drama, is really funny. And then the follow-up, not with the witness, because he killed the witness, is a great pair.
Not with the witness, because you killed the witness. But I got another way to prove it.
I also really like Columbo's reversal of the earlier Mrs. Melville insult used by Ken throughout the episode.
For the first one, not for the second one. That was sloppy. Mrs. Melville, she'd have been very disappointed.
It's done in a way that perfectly suits Columbo. It's not arrogant or showy, but it is a genuine observation. We also know that Columbo read the Mrs. Melville books, so what he's saying does have genuine backing rather than him just throwing an insult that has said to him before back in his face. So I like that the comment is backed with evidence. And then also in Columbo's explanation of why he suspected Ken in the first place, he mentioned that Ken never showed genuine emotion over Jim's death. It reminds me of this book called The Outsider, which is a deep dive into human complexity and truth. I think it's originally French and then it was translated into English, something like that. But yeah, on its own, that wouldn't really be enough for a conviction. But when you lay it with his arrogance and impatience, it makes a lot more sense. And Ken's final reaction seals it. He's not devastated. He's not even remorseful. He's annoyed.
Whoever thought that idiot would write it down?
Okay, on to number 2. So in this episode, art critic Dale Kingston has killed his uncle to get hold of his valuable art collection. He's also got an accomplice, art student Tracy O'Connor, who he also kills later on in the episode. Another double murder. I'm not convinced that this is a secure setup on the lieutenant's side. Dale insisted on giving Columbo his keys so he could search the house and ensure that the paintings weren't stashed somewhere. That was a very silly move on the killer's part, as it allowed Columbo to be waiting in the house. Columbo probably had a feeling that Dale would bring the stolen pictures at home at some point, but he couldn't have been sure. Dale could have left them in the car and not brought them in the house at that very moment. However, I guess it's that element of surprise. Columbo was there and Dale didn't know he was still at the house, and I'm sure Dale wouldn't have brought them in if he knew that Columbo was still there. Also, Columbo's methods are never really sure. They're based off of a hunch or a feeling or an inclining anyways, so maybe it is quite fitting for Columbo. But let's think, if Dale didn't bring in the paintings and Columbo didn't touch them, how else could Columbo have caught him? I have no doubt that the lieutenant would have caught him somehow, but that how seems uncertain. As I mentioned, if Dale hadn't insisted that Columbo take his keys, it would have been a lot harder to catch him. Even if Columbo had still dropped the hints that made Dale plant the paintings at his aunt's house, that is, Columbo's insistence that Edna was still innocent, there would be no fingerprints that tied them to Dale. So this all hinged on Columbo's confidence that it was the stolen paintings that he touched. Very risky move, but all facilitated by Dale. I also like the moment at the end when the officer says to Dale, "We know what you thought."
What do you mean it's his case? I thought it was... We know what you thought, Mr. Kingston.
It implies that Columbo has already walked the department through his logic of the case. It's a reminder that Columbo doesn't work in isolation, and the department backs him, even when his methods look odd in the moment, to say the least. Dale is a bit of a mix. He is slimy, he's condescending towards Columbo, but he's also a nervous wreck. In those moments where Columbo walks away and the camera pans to the killer's face, Dale is constantly in a state of intense worry. So I reckon his final reaction matches his personality throughout, and we're all happy because he deserved to be caught. Framing poor Edna, that is a low blow. So when the gotcha lands, it's confirmation. There's also nothing to say after Columbo pulls his hands out his pockets. Gloves! And that reaction is top tier. The lip quiver, the shaking, the pointing, the acting. Brilliant. I think the reaction isn't just the fear of being caught, it's also that fear of exposure. Dale's self-image, cultured, refined, superior, collapses very publicly. From the moment Columbo stuck his hands in that bag, I knew it was over. So I wouldn't say the gotcha was unpredictable. I think it was a bit out of character for him to be that forceful to look at something or touch something. However, it's still one of the best and the most satisfying moments throughout the entire Columbo series. And unlike some Columbo killers, there's no lingering ambiguity here. When Dale breaks, the show lets us enjoy it. He deserves to be caught. A stitch in crime. Heart surgeon Dr. Mayfield has his plan in action to kill his research partner Dr. Hydeman in order to claim a breakthrough heart drug. The dissolving sutures will make the death look natural, and all that is needed is to wait. But a suspicious nurse works it out, and Mayfield has to kill her in order to stop the plan going pear-shaped. It's this murder of the nurse that brings Columbo into the episode. It's more the overarching setup that makes this episode's gotcha brilliant. Columbo has most of the puzzle pieces early on, but once again, he has no evidence.
You've got everything except proof.
Then what changes everything is that moment where Columbo loses his temper and reminds Mayfield that they'll be looking at the autopsy report if Hydeman dies. It's that pressure that exposes a huge flaw in Mayfield's plan, one he hadn't anticipated and now has to correct. From that point on, it becomes a bit of a catch-22. If Mayfield leaves Hydeman to die like he planned, he'll be caught, and if he tries to save his life, his original plan will be spoiled. Furthermore, how will he hide the dissolving suture? It's like Connect 4 when the opponent can beat you in two different directions. Columbo doesn't really need to know which move Mayfield will make, only that he has to make one. Hiding the suture in Columbo's own operating gown is a very bold move, but it's only possible because Mayfield has been backed into a corner. The brilliance of the setup isn't the suture itself, but it's the fact that Mayfield is not really given another safe alternative. So Columbo's overarching setup does well here, even though the impromptu search of the operating room doesn't do what we, or he, thought it would. I would say that Mayfield's reaction matches the personality we have seen, and in a really interesting way. For most of the episode, Mayfield is cold, controlled, and emotionally restrained. Even when things go wrong, he doesn't explode, and that's why his lack of anger when being caught fits him perfectly. What's clever is how this reframes the earlier outburst in the operating theatre. At the time, it feels like Mayfield has simply grown frustrated with Columbo, which would be completely understandable. But in hindsight, that anger is still out of character, and that is the pop. So by the time Mayfield is caught, the calm returns, he knew the risks, he understood what he was doing, and there's no meltdown because he was never an impulsive killer to begin with. This is one of the strongest gotchas in the entire series for its sheer unpredictability. I have said this in an earlier episode, but I genuinely had no idea how Columbo was going to catch him. Evidence feels almost non-existent for most of the episode, and there's even a moment where it genuinely looks like Columbo has lost. That moment when Mayfield runs his hands through his hair You think it's over. It reminds me of Columbo Cries Wolf, where we think it's all over. But then you realise there is still a few minutes of the episode left, so something has to happen. This gotcha gets extra points because Columbo gets angry, he forces the killer into a risky and corrective move, and the evidence only materialises at the very end. Okay, most dangerous match. This is why you need more than one hobby. Chess was Clayton's life, and he killed for it. After losing a mock game in a restaurant, Grandmaster Emmett Clayton panics and decides to kill his opponent Dudek the night before the high-profile game. Unfortunately for Clayton, Dudek survives the attempt on his life, so Clayton has to meddle with Dudek's medication in the hospital to ensure he dies. We have yet another high-stakes murder. I really like this gotcha. The realisation, the way Columbo sets up the evidence and the shouting. Because why were you still shouting? You didn't realise the machine was off in the same way you didn't realise before. However, I came across a comment that made me think twice. A subscriber mentioned that the gotcha, and then also the setup of the episode in general, was quite unrealistic. There is a really high chance that a deaf person would have felt the vibrations of the machine, so they would have known that it was off. And it makes sense. I have seen deaf people experiencing music via the vibrations from speakers, but I guess that puts a hole through the episode rather than the gotcha itself. I would say the reaction matches the personality we have seen all episode. Those nightmares at the start creep me out just a little bit. He doesn't look that anxious throughout the episode, but I do believe his reaction fits the panic that we see at the beginning. It also matches the reaction that he had when he lost the game with the amateurs early on in the episode. His control was definitely slipping.
Prove something. Prove it.
If Most Dangerous Match taught us to have more than one hobby, then Deadweight teaches us to never be so desperate that you let somebody rewrite your reality. To shake things up a bit, I'll be focusing on the gotcha moment from the point of view of the poor Helen Stewart rather than General Hollister. The lieutenant's setup was brilliant. Columbo understanding psychology and realising that Hollister would never have given away the gun. We also see the pop in the restaurant when he gets the chili, which is really nice.
I think I'm gonna do a little fishing.
Hey, all right, if you catch something good, bring it in.
Columbo framing his final move as an innocent last gesture or apology is a recurring theme in Columbo. We see it in A Case of Immunity when he goes to apologise to First Secretary Hassan, and also in Any Old Port in a Storm when he takes Carsini and Karen to dinner. Watching the killer switch from triumphant to defeated will always be a gem. What's different here is why Columbo pushes it through. So once he's sure that a murder has actually taken place, his frustration isn't only aimed at Hollister, it's also aimed at Helen. While I think he understood why Helen wouldn't own up, it certainly made a clear-cut job harder. The evidence is effectively standing right in front of him, so he has a double job: incriminate Hollister with real evidence and save a naive girl from doom. I reckon eventually Hollister would have gotten bored and either killed her or at least dumped her. For a lot of these episodes, I think the mantra here is that pride is the devil. Rather than trap or having to bait the killer, all Columbo had to do was think, what would be in or out of character for General Hollister to throw away the gun? I like this gotcha because it was more of a sitting duck clue. Hollister didn't have to do anything more or less, apart from deceive the witness, of course. Columbo just thought. And I find this one more impressive, in my opinion, using pure detective skills rather than forcing evidence to materialise. For Hollister, his reaction matches perfectly. Silence is golden, as they say. And for Helen, her compliance, hesitation, and quiet loyalty all line up with what we've already seen. She doesn't suddenly become brave or strong, and I don't think the episode rewards her with transformation either. It just releases her. Now, I really do want to mention every single episode, so I'm going to do a quick fire mention of everyone else. Death Lends a Hand, another great episode. You guys know I really like Cope. Brimmer's reaction to being caught doesn't suit the personality that we've seen, in my opinion, but in a good way. sincerely apologizing to the husband for the death of the wife, when all we've seen him do this episode is shout, is a great element. It reminds me a bit of Baidoon's early light. Lady in Waiting, her story leaked more than a sieve, so that gotcha was inevitable. I like the gotcha because it was literally silence. I don't think she said a word. I did not see the gun being pointed at Columbo coming, but I get it was her last shot of being in control, considering the theme of the episode. Short fuse. Oh guys, you already know this episode confuses me. A good observation from a commenter was that once Stanford had realised that Columbo had totally outplayed him, he took the medallion, which is basically a symbol of his intellect, education, superiority, and placed it around Columbo's neck. And the implication of that was him saying, "Lieutenant, you got me, and you deserve this more than I do." Blueprint for Murder. This was a brilliant gotcha. It's cool that for season 1, we have 2 slight deviations from that classic Columbo format. The first is obviously dead weight with a witness watching everything beforehand. And this one, we are kept in the dark about how Markham actually killed Bo Williamson. It's nice to see experimentation with the format so early on in its production. Greenhouse Jungle. I like the embracing of modern technology in this episode, how Columbo catches Jarvis with the metal detector. Although it was very obvious it was Jarvis, probably from the same reasons as Ken, no emotion, etc., Columbo still had to find evidence. And I love the actual gotcha. Halfway through talking, Jarvis realizes, and then he is just silent. Itchy in Black. I really like this episode, but I have spoken about it so many times. One thing I will mention is the word he uses when he's caught.
This is humiliating.
Oh my gosh, that is ridiculous. Dagger of the Mind. I've seen Columbo's setup get a lot of hate here. That is when he flicks the pearl in the umbrella. And I get it. Is planting evidence to force a confession legal? Regardless, I love how the wife defends Nikki at the end. Most Crucial Game. Such a weak gotcha. Could Colt not just say to the jury that the clock wasn't working at the time? I also had this debate with my mum, and she said that Columbo would have seen him convicted given the persistent person that he is. True. And this episode is also another reason why you just stay silent when Columbo asks you questions. Speaking of, double shock. So at the end, when Norman shouts at Dexter to just shut up and not admit anything, that is what I'm talking about. Just be quiet until your lawyer tells you what to say. Requiem for a Falling Star. I like the post-gotcha scene when Nora explains the murder of her first husband, something hinted at throughout the episode, but never really fully explained. It's like we get a form of closure, which is very nice. And that's every single episode. The main takeaway from these gotcha deep dives is that it's the method rather than the trick itself that stands out. Sometimes Columbo wins by pressure, sometimes by patience, and sometimes by letting arrogance do the work. And what underpins most of them is Columbo's understanding of people, sometimes better than they understand themselves. And if there's one thing that Columbo keeps reminding us of, it's this. You don't need power, intimidation, or even perfect evidence to win. You just need to be paying attention. And in these early seasons, we see that blueprint being laid. Which one of these gotchas do you think are the most underrated? And did I miss any key analysis? Drop it in the comments and let me know if you'd like this analysis for seasons 3 and 4 as well. Just one more thing. I'll catch you in the next video.